Awesome. Well, we are so excited today to have Sali Crow here with us. This is like a dream come true for me. I've been integrating Sally into my life and my family's lives and my friends' lives for over a decade now.
Yeah, long
Yeah,
time.
maybe longer. Yeah, she's been to the farmhouse to do seances and group readings, and I
Teach Reiki. I
yeah,
taught a
I did
Reiki
Reiki
retreat there.
certification there. Saw my grandma and my grandfather, great grandmother, tucked her in at night. So yeah,
Hmm.
I feel like you did a family seance too for us.
Yeah, right after you got rid of your grandmother's stove.
Yep. All good.
I think it was one of the first things that came up, and I was like, oh,
Yep. Yep. Still hearing about that one. But now we have an industrial kitchen stove there, so I think she's happy now. But no, Sally has been a part of my life and my journey on this path, and has been very inspiring to me. She is a psychic medium from the Northeast Kingdom, and has you follow your Irish and Blackfoot heritage. Uh,
Irish Traveler, actually. So, Irish Travelers are a minority group in Ireland. They're nomadic, or they were nomadic. So, when we think of traveling people. They're really called the travelers or tinkers, which was the term that my grandmother used when I was little, is that she would tell me that her father was a tinker. And as a kid, I thought that meant that, I don't know, he fiddled with things.
right, Dinker. Yeah, but it's more of like a gypsy.
Yes, yes. So Irish travelers are not as nomadic now as they were, but the comparison that most people would think of as a gypsy is an Irish gypsy. Um, and I am mostly Irish, but I spiritually follow my great grandmother's line, which is where my gifts come from, and that is her father was an Irish traveler and her mother was Blackfoot. So that's where my teachings come from. That's where my upbringing came from. It was the culture that my family embraces the most.
Hmm. Awesome. And she is an author. You have is Spirit Speaker out yet?
It comes out April 18th.
April 18th. So that will be your third book.
Yes.
Jump Girl, which my sister Lindsay has right now, is amazing. Your first book, Elemental Witchcraft, is
The Path of Elemental
the
Witchcraft,
path.
actually, because there are two books that are on the market that are called Elemental Witchcraft, and mine is The Path of Elemental Witchcraft. The other one is by a woman named Heron Michelle, which is a totally different book than mine.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome. And is there anything else you'd like to add in your introduction?
I have worked professionally as a psychic medium for over 30 years. I have been aware of my gifts since I was about 3 or 4 years old. My great grandmother was my first teacher, and I grew up with it being very normal. Like, we didn't use words like psychic, but my grandmother would say things to me like, spirits talk to you, Sally, it's okay. Sometimes you know things, Sally. I'd be like, so it was very casual. It wasn't until I was in junior high that I started. It actually was watching um, The Dead Zone with Stephen King, where the guy comes out of his coma, and that was the first time I had heard the word psychic. And also, interestingly enough, I was only about 12, and I remember thinking, I don't want my gift to be like that. I wanted it to be something that blossomed and that I embraced, instead of have it come on in this sudden, like, overpowering way. It kind of had that jump up for the November incident, which is in Jump Girl, where it did go. But I had a lot of advancement before I got to the point where I got to have the volume turned up so high that I questioned my own sanity.
Hmm. Would you like to start there and talk about
Sure.
your gifts came and how you were able to set some boundaries.
So first of all, I was talk about what happened with my gifts opening. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, how you started to notice them and integrate them.
So I actually integrated them in my life my entire life. Like mostly like I did see spirits, I did know things. My sister and I both are psychic, and she's a year and a half younger than me. And so if I saw something and said I saw it, she could see it too. And my grandmother was psychic, so there was a lot of comfort, and it did feel really normal. It was talked about the same way as telling me that I had blue eyes and dark hair, you know. Um, and I was reading cards for the public by the time I was 18 years old. So, and it was never something that I was nervous about. Like at that point in my life, I was a designer. I designed clothing, mostly costumes and really cool hippie clothes. I had um, so I was more concerned with being judged on my art than I was on my psychic ability. I just did the psychic stuff. It was just like there. And I've had multiple stores. I started reading for the public again when I was about 18 years old. And when I was 30, I was a Reiki master in 3 schools of Reiki by then. And that's when I had what I call the November incident, which was when the volume of my abilities went through the roof. And I literally had multiple spirits talking to me all the time. I was having um, full on Kundalini openings multiple times a day. That is not fun. It kind of felt like I described that experience as being um, scrubbed down with a Brillo pad or steel wool and sprayed with a fire hose. Like never been as clean in my life because, all of a sudden, and I was lucky. One of the spirits that started communicating with me was Adam, who has been my doorman for many, many years. He's the spirit guide that watches my back when I'm doing spirit communication for people. And he was my youngest sister's best friend. So I knew him, but I didn't know him well enough to know all his stories. So finally, I was able, we had known each other in past lives, which explained why I really always loved him, even though I didn't really, have a connection to any of my sister's other friends. Um, and it was important that he play the role that he did because I could get confirmation to the things that I was getting for information. So having that contact, because he would tell me like random things, like conversations him and my sister had in a diner, or that I finally was able to call her and be like, hey, does this make sense to you? And so that was really helpful, that I knew I wasn't going crazy because the experience I was having was legitimate. Um, but
Hmm.
I was actually taught by spirit. Like I had a whole team of spirits that were teaching me, blowing my doors open, and I am incredibly thankful. I've been in a relationship with the same person for 33 years. So, we've been married 30 years this February. And
Congratulations.
if my husband wasn't as solid of a person as he was, I may have been taken to a hospital for some of the stuff that was happening to me. And I would have been medicated. They would have thought I was having a mental breakdown. Um, and it would have been handled really poorly. And in my work going forward, I am a person who a lot of people who are having spiritual opening end up in my circle because they can see that they're not crazy, or I can help them to see that they're not crazy, that this is actually something that's happening to them. Um, my first book, Jump Girl, when it came out, I didn't expect to see so many highlighters and pieces of paper shoved in my book that every time somebody comes to see me, because it's a memoir, Spirit Speaker, the initiation and art of, sorry, Jump Girl, the initiation and art of a spirit speaker. So it was talking about my life growing up psychic and my opening. And what I found was that people come to me all the time who they read that book and they're underlining things because they had that experience and they didn't have anybody to explain to them what that experience was. So they're like reading my book and going, oh my God, I now know I'm not crazy, or I now know that this is an actual legitimate thing. So, yeah, that's kind of where I started.
Hmm.
Yeah, and when I read it, I felt the same way. I felt, oh, I'm not crazy. and
Yeah.
and what a gift that is to like have a different perspective of mental, well-being, mental health, of it being actually a gift.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel so often that in today's world, so many people are disconnected from their gifts because we see it as like crazy or unhealthy in like our mental sphere. And I think that all of us have these gifts, and if we had the support that we needed or the validation that you had on your journey, which is so
Hmm.
incredible, then we would all, I think, like the world would be a completely different place
I
and in
think
such a
so too.
beautiful way. And one question I have for you is for people that don't have that validation as they're going through their journey, and maybe they do think they're kind of losing it, or they're, falling to that indoctrination that so many of us have been pulled into, that what we're experiencing is cuckoo or crazy. And I may have shared this story before on an episode, but I remember standing in the bathroom with my partner, and we were talking about spirituality, and I looked at him and I said, "Don't you hear the voices?" And in that moment, there was this like, wow, I have to get through this layer that's been put on me of feeling like a crazy person for saying that. I'm thinking of all the movies that I've seen, all of
Hmm.
the, inundated, like all of the stuff that just makes us feel like that's not okay. And so I guess my first question is, what do you say to the people that don't have that validation on their journey? And my second question is, what does it feel like when you have these experiences? Do you hear voices? Do you see things? Do you feel things? What is that like for you? And can you explain it a little bit?
So, answer to the first one is that psychology has even changed. I actually have worked out of a building that was a counselor's building, and I worked there because they called me and asked me if I would come take an office in their building. Okay.
Wow.
I see a ton of counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, doctors, nurses. So things are changing. Um, Not one of the things that is interesting is one of my friends teaches at, or I think he retired, but he taught abnormal psychology for many, many years. And he used to use me as an example. And he would say that sometimes when people are hearing voices, they are. Okay. Psychology has changed its idea of when hearing voices is unhealthy. If those voices are telling you to do things that are harmful to you or others, that's when you really want to question it. I never had spirits that were telling me things that were harmful. I'd also like to add to this that in my experience of working with people who are having psychic openings, it is not a commonplace thing for a person to pull dark spirits to themselves. This is a sensationalized thing that comes out of bad movies and religious dogma. Whenever I meet somebody who believes that they are possessed by demons, because I do meet them, they are always somebody who was raised in a restrictive religious background that does not fit them, that has told them that the voices they're hearing are demons. Um, that's, first of all, that's not a common thing. Most of the time, if somebody has something attached to them, it's a thought form attachment that comes out of a fractured part of their consciousness due to trauma. Okay. And it is in many ways, a figment of their imagination. It doesn't mean it's not real, but it's not a demon. So I like to clear that up because people get really nervous about the idea of spirit communication. I specialize in working with beloved dead. Okay. Which means just that these are our loved ones in spirit. So I think that one of the things, if somebody's having an opening, that is very helpful for them is to remember that the spirits that are around us, it's like living people, you know? Yeah, there are some real terrible people out there, but the majority of people are good. It's the same thing with spirits. And in many cultures, it's very common for us to communicate with our spirits. I think it's helpful if you're having that kind of opening and you don't have somebody to talk to ask yourself whether the spirits are telling you things that are harmful to you or others. And the other thing that is helpful is to read, my book, Spirit Speaker, A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying, the one that comes out in April, answers the questions that I've been asked by all of my clients over my years of service. So it talks about what happens when we die, and it talks about how spirits communicate with us, and it talks about how long we should wait after a traumatic death, and all of those kind of things. So books are helpful. Journaling is also helpful, keeping track of the messages that are coming through. And the other thing that I would say is take the words maybe, kind of, and think so out of your vocabulary when it comes to spirit communication. If you say, oh my God, I think I just saw my grandmother, rephrase that and say, I just saw my grandmother. And you will feel it. You will know whether that was a true statement or not. And chances are, if you're even saying, I think I just, or maybe there was something, take those doubtful words out, because we can think thousands of thoughts in any given second. Why would you suddenly, out of the middle of nowhere, think that your dead grandmother's in the room with you? Unless your dead grandmother's in the room with you. So one of the things I had to really get around was that when Spirit was communicating with me, that nothing that they were telling me was too bizarre. So one of the first seances I ever did, I had a family and they were talking to a dead grandfather and our father, and he kept showing me a giant rooster. And I thought at first, like, what the hell is this? This is like, and finally I was like, look, he keeps showing me a giant rooster. And they all started laughing and told me that he had a giant rooster statue in his yard. Okay. So that was the most accurate piece of information, the most personal piece of information that I could have brought forward. And most people wouldn't say it because they would be like, this is so ridiculous. Who would show me this? But it wasn't ridiculous.
Wow.
So, and I can't remember what your second question was.
My second question was, I have it written down here. Second question, I didn't write it down. Do either of you remember, Eleanor, Justin?
And we were all lost in my tangent.
How it feels. I think it was how it feels.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you.
Oh, and how I experience spirit. I am a multi-sensory medium, which means that I can feel them, see them with my visual eyes, hear them with my audible ears. They speak to me telepathically. They show me images in my mind. They can touch me, but I have rules against that. I literally have rules against that, because when I owned a bar years ago, I was goosed by a spirit, and that was my, like, you were not allowed to touch me. Like, that's not okay. But I can be. I could be touched by spirit, and my spirits do. And I can smell them. So, like, it makes me a good teacher, because whatever way the student is experiencing spirit communication, I can experience it that way too. So being a multi-sensory medium doesn't necessarily make somebody a better medium. It just means you have more avenues of communication that are open. But some pretty famous mediums are not multi-sensory mediums. For example, if you've ever watched John Edwards, he will point to a section in the crowd and say, I'm feeling somebody over here who has this. And I've had students who've gone to see him and they're like, well, how come he couldn't see that they were right behind that person wearing the green jacket? And I'm like, he was still got information that was accurate. He just is not a visual seer. So if you're not a visual seer, sometimes it's harder to point that out. But for me, the November incident in Jump Girl was pretty significant. I actually never talked really. I mean, I would mention it, but I never wrote about it. I never talked about it in detail until I wrote my book, because I knew even then that it was going to be a book. Actually, my spirits told me when I had the November incident that I would write books, that I would be on television. And I was like going like, this was like 20 years ago. Okay. So I'm living in rural Vermont with dial-up internet. And for those of you who don't know what dial-up is, you have not lived rurally enough. Um, um, but I was like, then why am I here? They also told me that everything would come out of Vermont. This was the first time in my life where precognitive ability was not something I was doing myself, but somebody else was telling me. Because my abilities are separate. Like I communicate with the dead, and I'm a precognitive person. Um, so I couldn't figure it out. So I blew a lot of things up in my mind, which people often do when they get a psychic reading. So for one thing, they told me that I was going to have a school. And at the time, Harry Potter was really big. So in my mind, I was trying, and they told me it'd be a brick building. So I was like trying to imagine how I was going to afford to build this building. Okay. I've been in 2 brick buildings that I've taught out of. Let's just put it that way. My office now is a big old brick building. Going back to the piece in which I created my own plan. So one of the things my spirits were able to tell me that gave me some peace is that even when they did things that were trying, where I felt like I was being tested, Adam would say something like, "I'm sorry, Sally, but this is how you wanted us to do it." And when he would say that, I would know that he was right, because I am a jump girl. I am a sink or swim, throw me in the deep end, and I'm going to find my way out. And so I learned best that way. So every time I was even frustrated with it, I couldn't be frustrated because I knew it was true. I would hear it and I'd be like, oh, I did create this plan. I did create that these things would be in place. I do want to add, though, that my first publishing house, North Atlantic Press, started in Vermont. It was based in California, but the origins were Vermont. I
Wow.
literally got that contract because I had Robert Simmons, who wrote the Book of Stones, came to my home in Vermont and had a reading with me and then introduced me to my publisher. My current publishing company is Inner Tradition, which is based in Vermont. So I'm like, I didn't even know these things existed at that time. So spirit speaks to us, and I think a lot of us don't listen. But spirit is speaking to all of us. Like where you said we all have these abilities. Yes, we do to some degree. Just like everybody can do art, but not everybody is going to be a fine artist.
Yeah, I would like to speak to that. When you get a reading with Sally, you'll often recommend to record it. And I've listened back to the recordings, a year later sometimes, and some things that didn't, I'm like, I don't know what that means. A year later, you're like, oh, there it is. That exact thing is, happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, sometimes it's not in your awareness right away, and spirit speaks in metaphors, and we can put the puzzle pieces together.
Learning your own symbolism is really important. Is one of the things I tell my students, is that getting books on symbolism are cool, but that first, what is your symbolism? What do you think when you see a fox? What do you think when, you get 3 red lights in a row? What do you think when, and then have those books on symbolism or dream interpretation. I tell my students to develop their symbolic language. So one of the great books that's out there is called The Women's Encyclopedia of Signs and Symbols. And it's not just for women, but it was written during the 70s or 80s. So it was definitely during the women's lib movement, because I was always like, why is this just for women? But it's a big book, and it's filled with different symbols from all over the world. And it's by Barbara Walker, I think is her name. But I used to just go through it when I was in my 20s and stuff. Sometimes I would just go through a couple pages a day. I'd sit with it. I'd think about those symbols. And what I was doing was I was adding to the vocabulary in which spirit could communicate with me. So like I've learned the runes, which I have a very deep love for, and for Norse magic. Um, and I just love, I know the Ogham. I have like studied different symbolic books, and but but it's more like programming your brain to be able to perceive than it is necessarily having to look everything up. It's that gets you to the point where you can trust your intuition more because you feel it. You know, you feel that you got that psychic hit. And we all experience that, but we've been trained to doubt ourselves. That's why the best thing that I came in, I am an older soul and I know that, and I came in with a really good plan. Like I had a teacher at birth. I had a partner in that because my sister and I are best friends. We work together. Um, and I met my husband when I was 18 years old. So who I had a lot of opportunity to be able to stay home as a stay-at-home mom and study, so like my kids were my top priority, but I had a lot of time that I could, sit with the tarot or sit with whatever it was I was studying. And I really think that I was given a lot of luxuries in that way, that I was given a very supportive nest, if you will, to develop my gifts. I never thought that this would be my career. So for all of my own psychic abilities, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fashion designer, or I thought about a model. I thought about all these different things. And most of it was based on the fact that even as a child, I knew that I would someday be famous. Like when you're a kid, you don't know what that means. I certainly didn't think I would be known for talking to dead people and, you know, growing up in the 70s in northern New Hampshire, be like, I think that everybody's going to know me because I write books and talk to dead people. So we never know. Our interpretation of the future is not always exact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it calls in a lot of patience.
Mm-hmm. And learning timeline. Jesse, you brought up that sometimes things happen later. Learning timeline is the most difficult thing in developing psychic ability when it comes to precognitive ability. Because in my early days, I did a lot of work that I didn't have to do for 5 or 10 years. Because I knew it had to happen and I'd be busting my ass. Now I'm thankful though, because it means I have a lot of half done things that I can just
hold on. Yes.
That's such a valuable thing to do in life in general. Just like that came up in a conversation we were having with another guest. Like, you don't always have to run with everything that comes through right away.
Right.
Like, let it marinate sometimes.
Yes, for sure. And learning how, like, in many ways, when it comes to timeline, I had to develop my own imagery to help me to do that, and actually being a medium helped me a lot more because spirits communicate differently. It taught me a lot about the difference between introverts and extroverts. Extroverts are the talkers. So they're the spirits that are literally talking to you, telling you a story. With extroverted spirits, I can often say their words exactly, or I will find myself holding my body in a posture that's like them, or I know that they talked with their cigarette all the time, or introverted spirits communicate more through imagery and emotion. And this actually made me a better partner. And it made me better teacher to people who, when it came to relationships, because like my husband's very introverted and I'm very extroverted. So if we got into a discussion and I said something and wanted a really deep answer, I would often get things like, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. I'm sure that there's a bunch of people out there who can relate to this. And what I realized from working with spirit was that introverted people need to have time to process their experience from a visual emotional experience to a word experience, where extroverts, we've got dialogue like in our head, rehearsing it all the time. So yeah, spirits communicate differently.
Neat.
And even with that, not all spirits are like, when somebody's doing spirit communication, it's not just the ability of the medium, it's also the ability of the spirit. Because some spirits are really good at it and some spirits are not. And usually the ones that
Mm.
aren't also struggled with communication in life as well. They were, their family isn't surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about spirit. So, I think there's a pretty common belief that spirit, when we're communicating with spirit, is somehow like stuck between realms, or that it is like unpleasant, or, there's like this kind of, I don't know, I worked in a town called Cassadaga, Florida, which you might be
Yep.
familiar with. And it's a pretty intense space and place. And I think there's more of a dark energy there from my experience.
It's a
And
spiritualist community, yes.
yes, and it's like the sister town to Lilydale, which is in New
Yep.
York. Yep.
Yep.
And there was this vibe, and kind of like I kind of gathered that there's almost this energy of like stuckness to the spirits that are being communicated with there. And so I'm curious what your, beliefs and perspective and like insights are into that.
So first of all, spiritualism is a Christian-based form of spirit communication. I am not that. And a lot of mediums are, though, that they can get an education through the spiritualist church. Um, I have never met a spirit that's been to heaven, and I've never met a spirit that's been to hell. I do think that spirits can get stuck, but the majority of spirits are not. So to me, a ghost is a spirit that does not know that they are dead. And I do run into those. Usually it involves a haunted house or something like that. And I do not do entertainment haunted house stuff. I help families who have spiritual experiences happening in their house that are disturbing. And in truth, I do that maybe 5 to 10 times a year. Okay. Some years are more. I've had times where it was like, holy shit, I've got like 5 people with these problems now. But even with that, my first question to people who are having those experiences is, do they have somebody living in their house who has a mental illness or somebody who's going through puberty? Because a lot of poltergeist activity is actually created by a living person who's having a hard time expressing themselves and their energy is going all over the place. I can be like that. If I remember coming home maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it was more than that because I was still working on the road. And my family didn't know that I was seeing clients in the house the next day. So I come in late at night. The house is a mess because I've got 2 teenagers and I'm pissed. And I start frantically cleaning. And then I had to stop myself because things were literally falling off the shelf at me. And that was because my energy was just like, okay. So, but going back to trapped spirits, there are spirits who meet their end unprepared. Usually it involves either a acute trauma or that the person was struggling with depression or um, was somehow lost in transition. Okay, so excuse me. Um, Adam, for example, was not stuck, but for a short amount of time, he didn't realize he was dead because he got malaria. Actually, that's how he died in Costa Rica. And he was delirious. And so he had been in and out of this state of delirium, and he didn't actually know the moment that he crossed into spirit until his grandfather came to get him. Okay. Almost always there is a spirit that comes to get somebody. It is usually a loved one. And there are spirits that hold that role in the afterworld. Usually every family has one. They're like the family matriarch or patriarch. Jessie is probably your great grandma. She's going to be there until everybody gets there. And then I personally believe in reincarnation. So what happens when we cross into spirit is that the volume gets turned down. That's the first thing that happens to somebody. The volume of their emotions. So thinking of emotions on a volume dial of 0 to 10, all of this stuff is in Spirit Speaker. So if people want to know more about this, is really educational, and it's not a huge book either. So unlike the Path of Elemental Witchcraft, which is a tome that you can use
Yes,
as a
it's
weapon.
560. Yeah.
Yeah. So the volume gets turned down. If you imagine our emotions on a scale of 0 to 10, Most people go through life with their emotions set at about 4 or 5. Somebody struggling with anxiety and depression might be as high as an 8 or a 9. Okay. When we die, that dial gets turned down to about a 2, which allows us to analytically process the things of our life. And we go into this review state. Okay. And if you're a well adjusted spirit, then the review state is not something that you're stuck in. It's more of like you can come in and out of it and you can visit your family. You're very aware of the fact you're dead. There's no time, no space when you're dead. So waiting 40 years for your partner could go by in a blink of an eye for you. You can visit your child in Vermont and your child in California like that. Okay, there's that. When somebody goes to their death with a lot of trauma or unresolved issues, they go into what I call timeout. And kind of like when a kid has been naughty and you put them in the timeout chair so they can reflect on their actions and how those actions affect other people as well as themselves. The spirit that goes into timeout has very little contact with other spirits. Okay. They're having a deep dive into a review of their life and they're seeing it from all perspectives. So they're not just seeing themselves being beaten as a child, if that's their story. They're also seeing their dad and why he did it and the damage that happened to him and how much their dad hated himself after doing it but had no control. Do you know what I mean? Like they're getting to fill in the blanks of what went wrong in their story, whether it was by their hands or somebody else's. Some people can get trapped because they are so traumatized or so afraid of dying that they do get stuck in an in-between state. I don't do entertainment haunted things because my grandmother would kick my butt. If I went into, like, for example, like some ghost hunter things will go into like an insane asylum, I'd be spending my time doing crossing overs the whole time. In fact, one of my friends who's a medium, not a professional one, she works in mental health. She used to live near the mental hospital in Waterbury, Vermont, when she was a young woman. And she joked that she used to have to do Friday night crossovers because when you're a medium, you put off a lot more light. That's the best way of talking about it. Your luminosity is brighter, so more spirit activity happens around you. So natural mediums are people who come in and they don't have a choice on whether they're going to be a medium or not. I was one of those people. I had my first experience with spirit when I was 3 months old. And I don't remember it, but my grandmother would always tell me about it. Which means that I didn't have a choice on whether I was going to see spirits or not. So a natural medium, like I tell people, like if you have a haunted house and you have nobody living in the house that is a medium, nothing will happen. If one medium moves in, everybody in the house can experience things because the medium is like a battery. Okay. A medium is like a conduit that transforms energy from the living world to that of spirit and makes it so the spirit has the energy that they need to do things. And it takes a lot of energy for a spirit to physically move things. So if that's happening, the spirit is really trying to get somebody's attention. Okay. I'm a tangent person, so if I'm taking you way off where you guys thought you were talking to me about,
it's great because I think a lot of the magic that I've experienced from you is, yes, in the things specific to me, but also just in hearing your beliefs and what you believe in and how you perceive the world. And so I'm really curious at our time left if you would share kind of about where we are at in the world and your perspective of that.
Okay, I'm a very optimistic person. Okay. I know without a shadow of a doubt that I am here at this time on purpose and that I'm here to be boots on the ground. And I believe that a lot of us are, particularly people who identify as old souls. We didn't come in on accident this time. We came in to make a shift. I also took part in writing a anthology called the Corona Transmissions. It came out in the beginning of 2020, right after, I think it came out in May of 2020, so right after the pandemic started. And it was a compilation of work between astrologers, psychics, and thinkers, and writing about what they thought this time was and this pandemic happening was. And most of us were on the same page. And what we see is that, and I'm saying we, I'll say what I see is that when we think of quantum physics and we think of multiple lifetimes or multiple things happening at once, in some of them, you might have chosen a different topic you wanted me to talk about, or I could have come wearing a yellow sweater instead of a blue sweater. Okay, really simple changes. But within that concept is this belief, and astrology really linked up with this too, that we have these two realities that are running side by side with each other. Okay, and I refer to them. I had a experience with psilocybin in 2000. It was right before I actually got my first book contract. And one of the things, so it was like 2016, I think. And I clearly saw this as two worlds, one of them that I called order, which was power and power over. So it is a place where most people who are falling into that belief system are falling into a place of fear, whether it's either I don't have enough, so I have to have power over you, or I am powerless and fearful all the time. Okay. The other one, which I called green, was this because it made me think of how living organisms work and how, we're all connected, and that there is a huge amount of people who've come in that are entering this more like this green reality in which we know we have to work collaboratively, we have to be part of the change, we have to change our consciousness. So we've got these two parallel tracks, and what we're finding is people, and this is, I've really been watching this since 2020, is that there's a lot of separation happening in families and communities based on which belief system you fall into. So in my mind, how I envision this is that I am diminishing in that fear-based order reality. Sali Crow doesn't really exist very strongly in that part. Whereas I have family members and friends who have been swallowed up by fear, who are literally disappearing from my life. Like, I don't have very much contact with them. They don't want to be part of my life, So in the other world, I'm probably the one that doesn't want to be part of their life because I don't want to sink into it. So that's kind of how I view what's happening. And I view that we have the capability to really make change. And a lot of it has to happen through consciousness expansion. I believe we're going through a psychic evolution in which more and more people are becoming psychic. And what I joke about is that not everybody wakes up happy. So waking up or awakening is fine and dandy if you've been planning for it. But I experience a lot of people who suddenly find themselves overwhelmed because they're so empathic and they don't even know what that is. They were happy with their day-to-day life and going to Walmart on the weekend. And now they're suddenly feeling everybody's feelings and they feel like they're crazy. So those of us who are more aware and who've chosen this are going to be called more and more into positions of being wisdom keepers in which we have to help other people adjust. And part of how we do that is through love, art, magic, community. I don't believe that we're all going to die off. I think a lot of people are going to die. Okay, that's a no-brainer. But the planet's way overpopulated anyway, so that's a big problem. But I also feel like there is a huge amount of powerful souls that are alive right now, and people who have chosen to come in with their spirit tribe in this lifetime. So, like they are connecting with other people who help them to feel empowered. At least if you're in that green collective over there, you made a plan to basically be like, who are the souls that I've played with throughout time that help me step into my power? So I feel really optimistic. I feel like we're going to see some amazing changes in consciousness. I also feel like sound and light are two of the big things that are going to transform people in the next 10 years. Like we're going to find that medicine makes a deep dive into. I've been a sound healer for 20 years. Now seeing all of the people who are becoming sound healers, like when I did it, there was one thing that I found on the internet after 6 months of me doing it because I remembered doing it in Egypt in a past life. And now it is it's breaking bounds on its ability to be used as a modality. So, yeah, I'm optimistic. And I think that the people who are change makers who are here now, that we like to do that. Like when I was a little girl, I would have this thought stuck in the back of my head. And I think there's even a song that uses the lyrics. It might have come out in the 70s or 80s, but it says, I have seen the fall of Rome. And I have repeated that in my head so many times because I know that I am a spirit that likes to come in when times are changing. I like to see paradigms breaking down and being rebuilt. I like being part of the change. I am totally excited about the ability for humanity. I think that one of you guys said this already, if we all started feeling each other and learning what that means, because yeah, we're feeling each other, but now we have to educate each other because most people are just seeing that as mental illness, not as a evolutionary growth.
I think there's so much of that happening where we are just like educating one another. It's a big movement, I think.
And I think that that's a big part of it too. Like when you live collectively, you have to get out of the mindset that we've been programmed into that is competitive. Because I know that I'm not the right person for everybody, just like none of you guys are, but chances are we're the right people for some people, but we've been raised with a mentality that success is competitive and that it requires us to constantly be moving forward. That's one of the things I reevaluate a lot. Like my brain is full. It's on fire most of the time with ideas. But when I'm doing things, I've gotten better about asking myself if I really need to be the person that does this, or if I just need to talk about it until someone else wants to do it. Somebody who's going to put more of themselves into it than I will because I've got too much stuff I'm already doing.
Right.
Sometimes when we are those channels, we just know what needs to happen. And so if we have a more collaborative relationship with each other, we aren't going to get jealous if somebody else does something similar to what we were thinking about. I mean, that's really how we describe why shamans all over the world use many of the same techniques, because they were all receiving it, and it was an open channel. It's why writers, like as a writer, when I first started writing the Path of Elemental Witchcraft, there was hardly anything really that was out there. Now all of a sudden I'm seeing tons of stuff on elemental magic, so it's like, I don't think it's because other people, stole my ideas. I think we're all tapped into the same consciousness, and it's bound to happen that some of us get the same ideas at the same time.
Definitely. Wow. Well, I have to say, I've just like had this really beautiful experience of just valuing life and looking forward to death in this conversation.
I know,
and
right?
and that's beautiful.
Both are great. Both are great.
That's right.
You know what sucks? Transition. Transition is what gets us. I mean, let's face it.
The day we were born.
Nobody actually likes the moment of birth. Okay? It's not fun for the baby. it's certainly not fun for the mama who's pushing that baby out. But as soon as it's over, we realize that we just entered into this new way of being, and it's amazing and beautiful. And death can be the same way. And one of my personal goals, not only as a medium, as a healer, is that when we begin to have a living relationship with our dead, we will fear death less. We will accept that our spirits are talking to us and supporting us all the time. And we will grow as people. And also, this isn't a new thing, like I've had Japanese exchange students 3 different times, and one of them compared me to a Shinto priest when he stayed at my house because he saw what I did and he was like, "Oh, you're like a Shinto priest." And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of am." So if we look through culture, there's so many ways, and we have to reclaim our relationship with the dead because we'll be less lonely.
We can live more freely,
Yeah,
being
yeah,
afraid
for sure.
of death.
So Eleanor, I didn't hear anything. Do you have any questions? Just because I didn't hear your voice.
Right, I know. And, I don't know what to say because so much of this I was just soaking in, and I'm having a very intense experience today that you were speaking to directly, and so I just didn't have words, and I still don't really, and I've just been like over here almost crying this whole time. So that's what's been happening for me.
And we've just been doing a lot of head bobbing.
Yeah.
That's okay. I actually joke and say that I should have made an investment in the Kleenex company because part of my life is making other people cry.
Yeah, no, it's hitting me exactly. It was supposed to be today, of course. And I'm just very thankful. I think so. I got your book a couple when it came out. Pretty much, I got the book, and I think the thing that I really just especially keyed into at the very beginning was just the idea that I could be. What happens if I just assume that I can be hearing more, that I can be listening more, that there is more that is coming in than I am actually like acknowledging, recognizing, naming, looking at, all of those things. And I think, that is just something that I really appreciate about reading that. And I think I'm just really super appreciative of the normalizing that of all of this.
That's actually, to be quite honest, like after my Gaia episode, I wasn't sure what kind of clients I would attract because, there's a lot of way out shows on that channel as well. And not that I have a problem with that, but actually, most people have been started by bringing into the conversation that I was the most normal medium they had ever come across. That, I was on the school board for 9 years, so I'm pretty solid. But and that was it, is like normalizing it because it wasn't really dramatic and it wasn't really like, oh, this only happens to these people. It's like, no, it's probably happening to everybody. And yes, some people are going to be better at it, but some people are better at music and some people are better at art and some people are better at math. And I also like to point out that supernatural is still natural. It's just more of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
There's so many more questions, but
yeah, I know, me too.
The hard part is I could just talk forever.
I love
us too.
Yeah,
I know, right?
I think maybe I'll just add this other piece to it. Just what's been going on for me is that just this recognition of this past life in which I did when my abilities were happened so suddenly and were so strong that I did go crazy.
Yeah, me too.
And
I've done that. Been there, done that. Not fun.
yeah, yeah, and that and because of that, because of like having that knowing of like that possibility, like coming into this life with this feeling of like, okay, well, like you can go there, but it doesn't have to go like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have been watching people evolve, and one of the things that I've been working with probably for the last 6 months in my healing work is people who are working on their persecution wounds. And being put in a mental hospital doesn't mean you were really crazy. It means somebody told you you were crazy. Somebody, like I have past lives where my power was fully appreciated. I have past lives where I had to hide inside of a church because the only way that it was acceptable to have those gifts was if you're a person of God. I've had lives in which I was, considered crazy, you know. I do a lot of past life work with people, and because that's the other part of being in the time we're in, is that that's what 5D is. 5D is not just now we have this expansion where we can feel each other's emotions, but we're also feeling ourselves as multiple.
Mm.
So the wounds that we have from past lives are prevalent. And I work with past lives around something that I call triangulation, which is two lives that are currently affecting the life that you're having right now. So some of your fears, some of your goals might be connected to those things that are in line. And that is something that can change. So what you're triangulating with now might have been different than what you were triangulating with at 12 or when you're 50.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, one of
Ooh, I want to
We'll just
know.
have to have another conversation.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 All right.
Right.
Well, one of
Mm.
the closing questions we have is what are you celebrating right now?
Oh, I'm celebrating my 30th wedding anniversary. That's one of the things I'm celebrating right now. On February 20th, I met my husband when he was 18 years old. He was 19. And I remember that I was afraid to date him because I knew, and I thought it'd be 11 years because I couldn't think a lifetime, but I knew that I'd be with him for a long time and I wasn't ready for that. But thankfully, I was smart enough to do it anyways, because that's what I'm celebrating. So that's my
Mm.
big thing that I'm personally celebrating.
Awesome.
Mm. Happy anniversary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be hopping on a plane to Belize on your anniversary, so I'll be thinking.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to Ireland for 2 weeks, end of April, beginning of May, with my children and my grandchildren. And I am staying on a 750-acre estate. So I'm going to have plenty of private time in weird Irish forests
Ooh.
and parks, and I cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yay.
So enjoy Belize.
Yes, you too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh.
And
Awesome.
is there any way that our listeners can find you or anything you'd like to share with
Sure.
our listeners that you're offering?
They can find me at SaliCrow.com. So that's SaliCrow.com. And they can find me on Facebook under Sali Crow Psychic Medium. Sali Crow is one word, Psychic Medium. I'm on Instagram as Sali Crow. My next book, Spirit Speaker, comes out April 18th. And here's just a little thing. If you pre-order through Inner Traditions, not Amazon, you may get your book before me. Last year, when the Path of Elemental Witchcraft came out, I had clients who were getting my book before I got my case of authors' books. I actually went and ordered a book off of Inner Traditions website and got it before I got my case of books because as soon as it hit their warehouse, they were just sending it out. So it was out like a month before people actually got it through Amazon. So you might get it at the beginning of April if you pre-order through Inner Traditions. I'm going to. No.
Me too.
Yeah, so maybe we'll chat after the book comes out and you guys have gotten a chance to take a look at it.
That would
Yeah,
be great.
love it.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this, ladies. This was a lovely time.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Sally.